keep your head above water, but if your arms are frozen to the ice, your head's not going underwater. You have an hour before you go unconscious. My question is, how many rescue teams can get to you within 10 minutes? Do the odds go up in an hour?
Yes.
Big time. The truth, knowing the truth, can save you. It's important to know the truth. Truth matters. Also, you need to take a risk to live. Matthew 10:39. He who finds his life will lose it, and he who loses his life for my sake will find it. A guy by the name of Stephen Callahan was sailing from Europe to the United States in a little single-person boat. And a solo crossing, I mean, lots of people do it. He was just doing it to do it for himself. And as he was sailing across, he had just left the Canary Islands. He was going to sleep, and there was suddenly a terrible crash. He was outside the shipping lane, so he didn't think it was that. His boat goes up and comes down, and instantly is filling with water, fast. I mean, in seconds, it's going down. He barely makes it out of the cabin as the cabin goes under. And in the process, he did not grab his survival bag. The boat flips over upside down. He had time to get his life raft, and he thought through this. He'd been prepared. Instead of a 2-man raft, he had a 4 to 6-man raft because he thought if he ever had to spend any time in it, he didn't want to be in a tiny little raft. And so he's got this raft, and the boat is upside down at sunrise, just at the surface of the water. And he realizes, I need to go into that boat and get that survival bag. Which means he's got to dive down, come up through the hatch, go inside the boat, hoping there's an air pocket, which there wasn't. Get his bag, come back out of there, get out and around, and get back to the surface, and if he gets snagged on anything, he's dead. But he's afraid that he's dead if he doesn't go for it. So he dives in, takes his chances, gets the bag, makes it. He said his lungs were just screaming at him when he's coming out. He was about to pass out by the time he got back to the surface. He climbs in the raft. The boat disappears. I mean, if it went down while he was in it, he was in trouble too. And just a little bit later, it disappears from down under the ocean, and he's now alone on the ocean surface in a raft. Nobody knows he survived the crash. By the way, they think what happened to him is a whale came from underneath and hit him. That or a submarine. And the submarine captain probably would never tell. But probably a whale. And he begins floating. In the survival bag was a knife. There was a harpoon gun. Then there's a solar still and a couple of other little things, including a fork. And the fork's actually going to save his life on the trip. But as he travels, he goes by a week, 2 weeks, a month.
Oh dear.
76 days later, he sees land. And he or some fishing boat finds him. 76 days later, do you think he could have survived without risking his life to save it? As Christians, we're not going to survive if we don't spiritually risk our physical lives to reach out to others. Jesus said, if you acknowledge me before men, I will acknowledge you before my Father. James Eliot said, he is no fool who risks that which he cannot keep to gain that which he cannot lose. And James Eliot is the one with 4 other men were killed by the not the Inca, but the Ecuadorian Indians. They're in Ecuador. And they had shotguns with them. And they didn't protect themselves. Because they wouldn't shoot somebody that they were trying to reach with the gospel. And the people who killed them became Christian. And some of the people who killed them eventually became Christian pastors. He is no fool who gives up what he cannot keep to gain what he cannot lose. Those guys knew what they were doing. So you need to take a risk to live. And the last one here is caring relationships and never give up. Hebrews 10:25. not forsaking the assembling of ourselves together, as is the manner of some, but exhorting one another, and so much more as you see the day approaching. You need caring relationships. You need a church family, a spiritual family around you. And Mark 13, and you will be hated by all for my name's sake, but he who endures to the end shall be saved. Al Haynes was flying a DC-10 from the west coast to Chicago. They were just getting up to cruising altitude when the tail engine disintegrated. There's an explosion, and it sends shrapnel through the tail, tearing the tail up pretty badly. And, everybody in the plane knows something just went wrong. And Al Haynes comes on the intercom, and he says, we just lost our number 2 engine, but we still have a good engine on each wing, and it'll be fine. We can make it into the airport with 2 engines just fine. Up in the cockpit, he tries his controls, and there's nothing. Good news. This plane has more than one hydraulic system. He switches to number 2. He tries the controls. There's nothing. Good news, it has more than 2. He flips to number 3. He tries the controls. There's nothing. Bad news, there is no number 4. He radios in his situation, and the engineers and stuff on the ground get together, and they give Al Haynes this wonderful pronouncement: there is no way to fly that airplane. Do you want a pilot that's ready to give up, or do you want a pilot that cares about his family, you and your family, and he doesn't believe in giving up?
Amen.
Al Haynes did not believe in giving up. He and a couple other pilots on board figured out a little thing that they were going to do. They discovered and figured out, well, they did have 2 controls that worked. The throttle on that engine and the throttle on that engine. That's what they have to fly a wide-body jet. That's it. They said it would be about like driving a car down Pikes Peak with no brakes and no steering wheel by opening and closing the doors. But that's what they've got, and they get this plane in a big circle. And they figured that Sioux City is where they can hit the ground. And so they're working this circle in, and they're dropping the elevation. And as they get closer, Al Haynes tells the people on board his airplane, he said, I'm not going to kid you, this is going to be one really rough landing. They tell him how to brace and everything. He said, I'm going to give you 30-second warning, and then it's all up to you. I mean, if your pilot tells you that, you know it's pretty serious, right? There's a guy by the name of Jerry Schemmel back there. And he says, thank you, Lord, that my wife's not with me. He's a 29-year-old executive. He doesn't wait for orders, he gives them. He's the most likely to survive on a plane. He's a young adult male. He's dressed right. He's not wearing a miniskirt and high heels. And he gives orders, he doesn't take them. Those are the people who survive the best in an airplane crash. And he thanks the Lord his wife's not with him. And then he asks the Lord to help him help other people. He's the right kind of guy. Meanwhile, he's also checking where all the exits are so that he has them locked into his brain so he can help people get out those exits. Meanwhile, Al Haynes is bringing this DC-10 down towards the Sioux City airport. And they clear him to land on any runway. That's not the normal one, just any runway. And Al Haynes comes back on the radio and says, with a laugh, you want to be specific and make it a runway, huh? Hey, if he hits the airport, he's hoping not to hit a building. He wants to hit an airport because that's where they have all the good equipment to save his passengers. And so he is trying to hit the airport. And he comes in and he hits the runway. He hits it really hard. He's going way too fast and he's coming down way too fast. But he only had one crack at that runway. And when he hits the runway, it breaks the cockpit off and the airplane ran over the cockpit. It ripped both wings off. You can watch the video. It's still available. It breaks the tail off. And the fuselage slides upside down into a cornfield. Jerry Schemmel is hanging upside down in a seat in that piece of fuselage out in the cornfield. He unhooks his seatbelt, twists around, drops himself to the ceiling, which is now the floor, and he begins going from one passenger to another, helping those that are alive and leaving the dead behind. You have 90 seconds to get out of a burning airplane, and this is a burning airplane. Because in 90 seconds it tends to burn through the hull, the fuselage. And so you have about 90 seconds to get out of a plane. He's burning his 90 seconds, helping one person after another. And eventually he gets to the point where he knows of no other living people that he can help. And he gave up worrying about where the exits were because he's got one big exit on each end, where it had been ripped off the front and ripped off on the back. And so he's been helping people out there, but there's now fire blocking the way out. He jumps through the flames without being seriously hurt. But as he's going through the flames, he hears the cry of a child behind him. He hits the ground, turns around, and goes back through the flames. Back into the plane. And he's in there, and it's full of smoke, and it's hot, and it's nasty, and there's, bloody, and it's just a bad scene. And he's saying, God, make that child cry. And as he works along through there, he hears the cry again. He goes to the spot. He cannot find this child. God, again. And he hears a cry. It's coming from down in the floor in the debris, which is the ceiling now, okay? It's upside down. And he hears this cry, and he opens an overhead bin, and inside is an 11-month-old girl. During the crash, the bin had come open. She'd flown in. The bin closed and protected her from all the stuff lying around.
Wow.
So when he opens it, she's in there, he grabs her, and she's relatively unhurt, just a little bruised. He grabs her, kind of shields her with his body as he goes back through the flames for the third time. And he's only minor burns. This guy moves when he's going through the flames, evidently. And he gets outside and he finds a mother that's in hysterics who's missing her child. And he gives the child back. And about this time, they find Al Haynes. They're cutting him out of the cockpit. Yeah, you got to cut Al Haynes and the flight crew out. Their cockpit had been smashed flat by the airplane. They're still alive at that point.
Amen. Amen.
And Al Haynes asked a question, did anybody die? And they had to tell him, yes, sir. He said, then I'm a failure. And they said, no, sir, you are not a failure. There have been more people that lived today than died. Let's see, an airplane that couldn't be flown. If you're one of those survivors, who do you owe your life to? To Al Haynes, who pulled off the impossible with the help of God. You see, as a church family, we need to be ready to never give up on each other because we have caring relationships. Never, ever give up. And friends, I'm just going to ask for a commitment today. Are you willing to be the kind of a Christian that never gives up on those around, and you will always look for and be a part of a church family that's following God's truth, because truth matters? If you're willing to do that, I just invite you to stand today. You won't give up on each other. You won't give up on yourself. You won't give up on God, because you care about each other. Let's close by singing, In a Little While We're Going Home. Because friends, it won't be long, and Jesus comes again. And we're getting out of here. And it's going to be spectacular. Let's sing it together. What's the hymn number? 626. 626. Let's sing it together.